I've always said this, any woman who's ever had a thyroid issue that's like, I have some type of low functioning thyroid, Hashimoto's, thyroiditis. I've always said to that particular woman in terms of intensity in the gym that you need to take it down. So whatever you think is an 8 out of 10 is probably a 12 out of 10 because of the type of person that you are to start with. There's like a certain phenotype of individual who gets thyroid issues. She tends to be very, very driven, very type A type of person, very independent. I mean, there's some, it's like, you're like, damn it, she's completely describing me. But yeah, that kind of, I don't, that type of person. It's like very driven, very success oriented. And then, midlife, she's 40 and then she's sort of hit with, multiple issues like the thyroid and now this poor recovery. I've always said to these women, let's take it down to like a 4 or a 5 out of 10, which is the hardest thing to tell a very driven type A personality kind of individual. They're going to completely disregard that most often and then go and do their 12 out of 10 workout and then be like, damn it, I'm down for the count for 6 days after this one workout. So what are some strategies that we can be thinking about as a way to help with our muscle recovery in the gym? And then maybe we also want to talk about what are some, does that mean that we have to check for parasites? We want to run a full blood, what is the data that we want to be looking for? And then what are some of the sort of clinical strategies that we can be doing in the gym and then post recovery that are going to help with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the things that I have found that were really helpful for me, obviously, I know that you've spoken about, protein, et cetera. The timing of it is really important to make sure that you're eating within that 2-hour window after you work out. I had to really, and I still enforce this in women that I work with, I should say, to make sure that they're dialing it down, like you mentioned, right? Otherwise, you're doing 3 workouts a week. It's probably not going to work for you. You have to let your body kind of get used to these things. The thing that I find is most women like myself and patients that I've worked with is the iron component to this, because a lot of them are anemic. And iron needs to be circulated. That's why this is not about iron deficiency, it's about dysfunction. So iron is literally the backbone of hemoglobin, right? And hemoglobin is found in our red blood cells. And what it does is it just essentially carries oxygen from your lungs to your muscles. So if you have a woman who's anemic, she's probably going to have less oxygen transport, which means faster fatigue, right? But if we have better circulation of iron, we're going to have better endurance, because iron essentially just ensures that oxygen is moving more efficiently to those hard-working muscles, and it's delaying exhaustion during that exercise. And then you have, of course, your mitochondria, which is like the battery of your cells, and they need iron for energy. So your mitochondria, that battery, uses oxygen to make ATP, which for those hearing this is essentially to make energy. And that iron is crucial for this process. So less iron equals less energy production. But again, I'm talking about circulating iron. There is a really big difference between unbound and bound iron. So just because you're taking iron doesn't necessarily mean that it's become bound. And so I think it's really important to dive into how it becomes bound so people understand it. Because if you're a woman who's really stressed out, and if you're very stressed out and you're eating like lots of processed foods and high carb, et cetera, your magnesium stores are probably going to be quite low, right? Because your body pulls for minerals and even vitamins to be able to support its stress response. So if your adrenals are compromised, it's not going to say, hey, liver, I need you to produce this protein called ceruloplasmin. And for those listening, in simple terms, think of ceruloplasmin as this taxi cab, okay? But to be able to open the door of the taxi cab so iron can get in and shuttle around in and out of our cells, it needs to be able to open the door. And to open the door, we need vitamin A, but not beta-carotene, vitamin A in the form of retinol, which is an animal source which is best found in cod liver oil. And so cod liver oil is so important for women with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's because they're often very deficient in fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin D, A, E, K, and cod liver oil has that naturally occurring in that whole food form. But then you have to open the door of that cab door. And to do that, you need copper. This is so important. We don't have an iron issue, we have a copper issue. And if we actually look at the mitochondria, that battery I was talking about, it's heavily reliant on copper-dependent enzymes to produce energy and also to regulate iron. So now the iron is in the taxi cab, ceruloplasmin, and now it can go and it can circulate. But when it's not bound, because we're just taking copious amounts of iron, but we don't have the supportive nutrients, copper, vitamin A, ceruloplasmin being produced from the liver, which it can't happen if you're super stressed out and you're magnesium deficient, then we're not going to circulate iron. And then we're going to be really, really tired, right? Because these copper-dependent enzymes, it's a really big key to producing your body's energy. And without enough of that, you're going to be very, very tired. And iron will end up being stuck in tissues where it doesn't belong. And that's where you're going to end up seeing iron not going to where it needs to. It's going to get stuck. Believe it or not, there was actually research done, and this is super crazy. There was research done by Dr. Bruce Ames to show that iron can be stored in tissues and organs 10 times more. Like that's kind
where it
of
shouldn't be.
Where it shouldn't be. It can actually accumulate up to 10 times higher in organs and tissues than it should be. And this essentially creates like a traffic jam in your body. And if it's storing in organs and tissues, one of the areas that they noted was that it's often in the liver. What happens there? Well, it begins to oxidize. It begins to rust. Like think of a cast iron pan that you have. You wash it, well, it starts to rust if you don't grease it, right? And iron can also be stuck and unbound in the lining of the small intestine, which becomes food for pathogens to feed off.
Parasites. Yeah.
Exactly. So people are like, well, you say that like iron is going to be stuck in the liver, but I thought it was because of parasites. I said, yeah, well, it depends on the individual, right? Like it's super important to understand this, because if iron isn't circulating, you are not going to end up having myoglobin. And for those of you guys that don't know what that is, it's essentially hemoglobin that's inside your muscles. And that's going to build up to more lactic acid, which is that heavy leg feeling that I was saying earlier, that I get my husband to massage my legs. Like low circulating iron leads to poor workout recovery, because if your iron levels are not circulating, your body is going to struggle to repair muscle damage. And that's going to make your post-workout recovery really challenging.
This is fantastic. Okay, so just to recap and redirect me here if I've misunderstood you. So we have the ceruloplasmin, this is the taxi. And then in order to open the door of the taxi, we need copper and we need retinol. We need vitamin A, both of those things. Let's maybe touch, and then that allows the iron to get into the taxi, and then ceruloplasmin can take it where it needs to be bound. So it can be bound somewhere versus accumulating unbound in the GI tract, where it can feed, like it can be just like a food source, like a full, a buffet for the parasites that we're hosting, and potentially oxidizing in organs like the liver. What I wanted you to touch on while you were talking, I was like, oh, copper. We should talk about zinc, because often copper and zinc, I mean, they use the same transporter. So I want you to explain that. But often when we're talking about iron, low iron, the things that are often recommended when we're taking iron is selenium and zinc. So how can we, and then, anytime you're sick, it's like, take zinc. Anytime you're, take zinc. So how can we be thinking about balancing our zinc intake for thyroid health alongside copper to allow to be opening the door to that taxa that we've been talking about? And then just for other general things, I mean, I kind of want to also talk about copper and hair, which we know is a really big problem for women and with low functioning thyroid as well. Like our hair often falls out. Yeah. So talk a little bit about zinc and copper, the sort of competing. I'll let you lay it out.
Yeah. So zinc and copper play like a seesaw act with one another. And what I find interesting is that, especially with athletic supplements, there's usually quite a bit of high levels of zinc in it. Yeah. And that can actually block copper absorption in the body, and it creates this unexpected mineral imbalance. So can we take zinc? Yeah, we can take zinc. It's not necessarily an issue to take zinc. It's just a matter of, if we're taking zinc every single day, we're probably further depleting our copper stores. And this is why I also am not a huge fan of vegetarian and vegan diets, because while they're higher in so-called non-heme iron, you're getting very low bioavailable copper. And there is a difference between bioavailable copper and biounavailable copper. So biounavailable copper, because copper has been highly demonized because people just think of it as, oh, you're copper toxic because you're on the birth control. Sure, but that's bio-unavailable copper. And its first primary storage site is the liver. It's why it's called an emotion. It can be an emotional mineral. People can develop a lot of anger and aggression with bio-unavailable copper that gets stored in this organ. The second storage site is the brain. So a lot of neurological issues can occur with bio-unavailable copper. So people get really freaked out by copper, but if it's bioavailable, we actually need it.
And we all seen those roofs. We've all seen the roofs on houses that start off copper and then they turn green. And we're like, I don't want that in my body.
At all, right? Because we just think it's so problematic. But ultimately, and then people are drinking from the copper cups. And I'm like, that's not bioavailable copper. The best bioavailable copper you're going to get is from beef liver, which is why the beef liver supplements are really great to take. But you can take as much as that of that as you want. But if your magnesium stores are super low, which can happen, like I said, from stress, dietary wise, about only 20% of oral magnesium is actually absorbed. And that's generally based on the person's gut health. So when I'm looking at magnesium and what I'm recommending is, yes, take the oral magnesium that's best for you, whether it's a glycinate because it's more calming or it's a citrate because you tend to go towards constipation. I'm always recommending dermal support. So like Epsom salt baths, even foot baths. If you have hot springs close to you like I do, go into the hot springs. You know what I mean? These are really great ways to provide that dermal support, because if you're just supplementing orally with magnesium, it's not going to be enough for your adrenals to go, hey, liver, produce the ceruloplasmin, right? And then I also see very problematic in individuals is they'll end up taking very high doses of synthetic vitamin C supplements. And the reason why that this can be so problematic is because it can end up making too much iron free and unbound in the body, especially when copper levels are low. So the thing that I always like is more whole food vitamin C sources. I'm moving away even from the liposomal forms because it is still synthetic. I'm looking at things like acerola or camu. They're not going to actually produce the same effect in the body.
Fantastic. So you mentioned copper bioavailability between plant and animal sources, beef liver being a great source of that. What are some other good, maybe whole food sources of copper? And if we had to supplement, if we felt like we had to supplement with them with like maybe it's a beef liver supplement, as you mentioned, is there a certain form that we're looking for on the label?
Not necessarily. When you get copper in a supplementation, normally I don't start with a synthetic copper. I always start with a beef liver supplement. I always trend towards the whole food forms first to see and then retest the person's blood within about 6 months. In terms of sources, beef liver is the highest. If you're eating an animal protein diet.
Also an A, right? It has very high in A as well. So
you're getting a double whammy there. So it is nature's really great mineral supplement for sure. Even beef spleen desiccated in pill form can be really helpful. And of course, if you're eating any animal products, you're going to get a variety of that. And I always tell people, if you're able to kind of vary your protein sources as much as humanly possible. But I'm always trending more towards the beef liver as my primary source of the copper.
That's good. And I think that we're almost like with the protein movement in general, I would say that people are becoming a bit protein blind. It's just like they're just getting protein where it doesn't matter if it comes from a protein bar, if it comes from a protein snack, if it's like they're getting 100% of their food from like whey protein, some whey protein. And listen, I know that the body for a temporary amount of time can do pretty well with and you can throw out a lot of junk, a lot of processed foods, and it'll kind of make do. But we're talking about, you don't just wake up with hypothyroid, like you don't just have, a week of, whey protein powders, let's say, and then wake up with a problem, right? This is like decades and decades and decades of chronic stress, unmitigated stress, residue on the nervous system, a certain way of showing up, and then as we've been talking about some of these mineral depletions with the magnesium and the copper and the vitamin A depletion as well.